Is it agreed to go into public session? There are 3 Schedule A proposals for decision. There are 12 items listed on Schedule B for decision. I propose we deal with Schedule A first. Schedule A, Com 2014-345, proposal for a regulation of the European Parliament and of the Council on common rules for imports of textile products from certain third countries not covered by bilateral agreements, protocols or other arrangements or by other specific union import rules recast. It is proposed that this proposal does not warrant further scrutiny. Is this agreed? Agreed. Com 2014-503, proposal for a Council decision on the conclusion on behalf of the European Union and its Member States of the additional protocol to the trade agreement between the European Union and its Member States of the one part and Colombia and Peru of the other part to take account of the accession of Croatia to the European Union. It is proposed that this proposal does not warrant further scrutiny, and we have agreed that it does warrant further scrutiny and that we are going to make a political report on it.
If I can just come in just briefly, to reiterate, I suppose, in a public session, a number of the members of this committee have met with representatives in Colombia, representatives of human rights organizations and of unions, and they've articulated very harrowingly the level of human rights abuses within Colombia currently, the number of killings that are often linked with groups supportive of the state, and the number of people from a human rights and civilian background who are jailed for their views. And their experience is that a large section of Colombian society have been excluded from normal social and economic activity, and this hasn't got better with regards to the European Union's negotiations with Colombia on free trade. This is obviously coming up for debate within the Chamber, and I welcome the fact that the Minister has accepted the request from this committee that there will be a full debate in it, and I know a number of other TDs and the other political parties were very supportive of that. And I think it's necessary that within the trade agreements that there is an overseeing facility that ensures the human rights situation in Colombia improves before proceeding to full free trade with Colombia on it. And my worry would be that if that doesn't happen, we will just see those abuses continue in Colombia while the free trade agreement continues.
Thank you, Deputy. We move on then to Com 2014-504, proposal for a Council decision on the signing on behalf of the European Union and its Member States and provisional application of the additional protocol to the trade agreement between the European Union and its Member States of the one part and Colombia and Peru of the other part to take account of the accession of Croatia to the European Union, and similarly the decision applies to this Com also. Agreed. So Schedule B, Com 2014-516, Com 2014-517, Com 2014-539, Com 2014-573 and Com 2014-574. There are also EWN 2014-C21710 Biodiesel USA, EWN 2014-C21711 Biodiesel USA, EWN 2014-C250-07, EWN 2014-C252-05, EWN 2014 L192-42, EWN 2014 L246-1, EWN 2014 C295-6. It is proposed that the proposals and notices listed in Schedule B, other than Com 2014-539, Com 2014-573 and Com 2014-574, do not warrant further scrutiny. Is this agreed? Agreed. And now we move into public session. We will suspend for a few moments while our visitors take their positions. Public session again. I would remind members and those in the public gallery to please ensure their mobile phones are switched off for the duration of this meeting, as they interfere with the broadcasting equipment even when on silent mode. And now we move to our discussion in respect of access to public procurement contracts and related matters for small suppliers. And I would like to welcome Mr. John O'Brien and Mr. Dave O'Reilly from EMS Copiers, Mr. Michael O'Brien and Mr. Brendan Bannigan from O'Brien Press, Ms. Mary Fallon and Mr. John McNamee, Alan Hanna's Bookshop, to discuss issues for small suppliers in respect of access to public procurement contracts and related matters. In accordance with procedure, I am required to read the following. By virtue of Section 172I of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of their evidence to this committee. If you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter only to a qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that, where possible, you should not criticise nor make charges against any person, persons or entity by name, or in such a way as to make him, her or it identifiable. Members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that members should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person outside the Houses or an official either by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. I would now ask Mr. John O'Brien to make his presentation to the committee, and I will then call on Mr. Michael O'Brien, followed by Ms. Mary Fallon. So, Mr. John O'Brien, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. I might just correct you slightly in that David is a self-employed person. We haven't subsumed him into EMS Copiers as yet, so just to give him his proper title.
Brendan Brannigan doesn't work for O'Brien Press.
Sellers Association of Great Britain.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyway, thanks for giving us the opportunity to make our presentation to your group. So I'll move straight into our PowerPoint and go through the various points that were there in the first place. Just to make the small point that whereas we are a copier suppliers group, Dave and I, the representatives of it, we believe the points we'd make would apply to small business generally, spread across the country. Supplying those sorts of different equipment is not typically limited just to the processes and procedures that we participate in. Now, we represent a group that are based all over the country, from Dundalk to Galway to Leitrim, Kilkenny, Tipperary, Cork, we have to mention Cork, and Dublin. And we were created in 2012 in response to the actions of the National Procurement Service, in response to their actions that we believed would have a severe impact on the people that we employ, on our own potential future, and the very survival of the businesses that we're involved in. So we found ourselves in a position that we felt that we had to react, and so we created a group and worked on from there. If I just move on. I'd like to make the point that the Office of Government Procurement defines an SME as a company with 250 employees or less and a turnover of not more than 50 million euro. It's our sincerely held belief that that is not an appropriate definition of a small or medium enterprise in an Irish context. It's totally inappropriate.
Through the chair.
Of course, I do apologise. So we would just point out that we believe that that's totally inappropriate. Now, the statistics I'm going to quote you now are the sources from the Central Statistics Office. So they give the following statistics and definitions. The definitions are micro companies that are up to 10 employees, small companies that employ between 10 and 49 staff, and then medium-sized employees are between 50 and 250 staff. So the point we're making that from that definition, SMEs employ almost 7 in every 10 of people participating in the Irish workforce currently. Now, 90.8% of SMEs are micro companies, so they are companies with less than 10 staff, and they employ 27% of the workforce. 7% of SMEs are small businesses, so that would be up to 50 staff, David, and they would employ 22% of the workforce. So 49% of the total workforce in the state are employed by companies that employ less than 50 employees. And then 1.3% of SMEs are in that final segment that I made the point earlier that I didn't feel was particularly appropriate or relevant as part of a definition of an SME of between 50 and 250 employees, but they still employ a significant portion of the workforce at 19%. Now, the question we'd like to ask is, why are micro and small SMEs being excluded for tendering for public procurement contracts, even at a local level, given some recent requests for tender that I've issued? So what that means in practice is, let's take David as an example in Cork. If he services the needs of a small national school and has done so for 20 years, and did that providing a level of service and providing good value to their client over that period of time, given the actions of the Office of Government Procurement, David would be excluded from even offering a proposal. He would be excluded from it. He wouldn't have the opportunity. So it's not a question of he's not able to compete, he's not allowed to compete. If I can move on. What we believe is the slavish adherence to the concept of aggregation and centralisation. Now, let me pause on those points, if I may. Aggregation is where the Office of Government Procurement has taken the complete requirements as the state, as they see it, in specific sectors. Not only excluded to copiers, by the way. So when I prefaced our comments earlier that this impacts on other businesses, I've seen RFTs that relate to janitorial services, ICT consumables, paper, stationery, motor vehicles, etc. The same rules apply. By aggregating the needs of the requirements of the state, it artificially inflates the requirements of individual smaller organisations that might well be subject to this tendering process. So as a result, a tender would go on to the European e-tenders website, and as a result of inflating the size of the various contracts, a whole series of pre-qualification criteria are applied that in effect exclude 97.8% of every business in this state is excluded from even responding to a request for tender in the first place. One small point to make is that if you're going to aggregate all the state's requirements, then you should centralise the procurement processes so that all of the purchasing comes from a specific source. That isn't the case. So do one or the other, but not have your cake and eat it, if I can put it in that way. What the Office of Government Procurement has maintained in its new persona of being SME friendly, which was a series of statements and circular that were issued earlier this year, was that small businesses should create consortia. Now, at a meeting of a previous Jobs, Enterprise Innovation Committee that David and I attended, we were clearly advised by a representative of the Competitions Authority that for David and I to sit in the room and discuss the supply of equipment that we supply by virtue of price or location would be not only a breach of the common law, it would be a breach of criminal law. So we would be colluding on price, and that's called creating a cartel. At that very meeting, we also asked both the representative of the Competitions Authority and a representative of the Office of Government Procurement, could you define how we can legally create a consortia that will enable us to respond to these tenders? And we didn't get a reply, because in our belief, such a thing doesn't exist. And there is precedent, as we understand it, of companies that have been brought to court, and they ran the risk of heavy fines and imprisonment. So it's something that we're not taking lightly in that regard. One more point I'll make is, and it links into the next slide I'm going to go to, the Office of Government Procurement is totally aware of this. And if you read any requests for tender that they issue, they may make reference to consortia, but ultimately what has to be clearly identified on a request for tender is a main contractor and then subsequent subcontractors. Now, my next slide will refer to the impact that that has on potentially my business and similar businesses who have to act in that way. So the point I clearly make is acting as a subcontractor to a main contractor does not constitute acting as an equal partner in a consortia. In fact, it's quite the opposite, because as a subcontractor, my turnover would be decimated, as in reduced significantly. The main contractor would have to employ front office staff to receive calls, they'd need to employ back office staff to fill orders, they'd need to have collection staff to get money, they'd bill everything, they'd take care of everything, and I would simply take instruction from that main contractor to perform specific jobs for which I would be paid a set fee. So the upshot of taking the main contractor subcontractor route, which is being put forward, is being called a consortium where it's clearly not. The main contractor, who typically would be outside of the state, would have to increase in size, employ more staff to meet the demands of the tenders that they've secured. And the subcontractor, as a direct response to it, would have to contract in size to drop jobs to reduce the number of employees that they have. But turnover would be significantly reduced as well. In turn, profits would be reduced. And if I can quote again a reference made by a representative of the Competitions Authority to a previous meeting of the Committee of Jobs, Enterprise and Innovation. He was asked clearly, what can an SME do to survive in this environment? And his comment was, you've got to consolidate. When I asked him what did he mean by that, he said, you've got to merge with the people that you deal with. You've got to create a brand new organisation that has no links to previous ones. So be acquired, merge, or acquire a third party. In his view, that was the only way we could legally advance the process outside of the main contractor, subcontractor route that I've just identified that we found so inappropriate. Now, our group has incurred legal fees of €206,000 to date in undertaking a judicial review of the actions of the Office of Government Procurement. Now, we are small businesses. We did not undertake that process lightly. We want to clearly flag it as an act of last resort. We had no choice, given the processes and procedures that we saw in front of us, other than trying to protect ourselves in that manner. Now, we're not going to comment on the individual vagaries of the case, but simply make reference to, that's what we've had to spend to date. I can only imagine what the state had to spend in this process. And yet, from our simple perception, small businesses are basically being ignored as part of this overall process. Now, what do we need? Small businesses, we're a copier suppliers group, but it could just be easily a group of stationers, janitorial supplies companies, ICT consumable supplies, paper suppliers. They've all been impacted by various requests for tenders that have been issued by the state in the past. What we need is a level playing field. Okay? All we want is an opportunity to quote for local business. So David O'Reilly here would like the opportunity to retain the business that he has, that he's nurtured and looked after for the previous 20 years, to gain additional business with the local companies and schools or state offices that are in his area. So simply give us an opportunity to tender. By all means, the state should do whatever it can to ensure it secures best value. That includes benchmarking price. I mean, at the end of the day, small businesses have to compete. We compete with the larger businesses on a daily basis, and we do that by offering value, price, and quality of service. So it's not as if the two processes can be mutually exclusive. But it's our clear requirement that there's a level playing field, that there's a removal of artificial pre-qualification criteria, there's an opportunity to tender for local contracts, and an inclusive approach. Now, I'm stating it here clearly, we support the Office of Government Procurement in its attempts to secure best possible value for the state. But that cannot be at the expense of closures of hundreds of small businesses, and that's what we firmly believe is at stake here, and the subsequent loss of thousands of jobs. And that's before you consider any potential loss of further revenue to the state in relation to main contractors being outside of the state, etc.
Thank you, Mr.
And
O'Brien.
I think that's the end of our presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. O'Brien. And now I call on Mr. Michael O'Brien from the O'Brien.
Thank you. I think my presentation is a little more political. O'Brien Press was founded 40 years ago. We're biggest independent publisher, but that doesn't mean we're big. We're quite small. We have 700 titles in print. We employ 20 people. And we create quite a lot of spin-off jobs to writers, to artists, to designers, editors, distributors, and booksellers. I'm also the Vice President of Publishing Ireland, which is our publishing organisation. I'd like to preface what I have to say by noting that the current government had a terrible job to do after the country was totally ruined by the previous administration. And a lot of very difficult decisions had to be made. And some things they did were very admirable. But one thing that came out of the government policy was the main thing, what they keep talking about, was creating more jobs. Jobs, jobs, jobs. So it's in that context I'm making my presentation. Now, the big disaster from this particular proposal for a national library consortium for tendering is that the government are now created a scheme to destroy jobs. This was never contemplated. And this is very, very shameful. It sounds like a good idea, a national procurement policy for the whole state. In fact, it just wasn't thought out. And I even began to wonder where the idea came from. Was it a secret deal with the Troika? You know, where did this idea come from? You know, an idea that runs counter to government policy of creating jobs. And here are the negatives. First of all, it completely undermines local democracy. Where are the county councils in all this, who are elected to look after their areas? And county librarians didn't ask for this and weren't properly consulted, because I asked some of them. It's destroying local community bookshops, who are really important both culturally and economically to the community, like Hannah's, 5th generation bookshop in our area. It'll damage book publishers like us, but it'll also damage downstream the writers, the artists, the distributors, the printers. This is the chain effect of this kind of action. But who is it perfectly designed for? It's perfectly designed for two British, very large British conglomerates who are library suppliers. One is called Bertram's and the other is called Gardner's. Now, just to give you the background, before the British took on a national procurement policy,
Not to mention names of anybody.
okay. Before the British government took on a national procurement policy like the one that's proposed here, there were 652 local library suppliers in the UK. Now there are 2. I inadvertently mentioned their names. A friend of mine said, we were first colonized by the English, then we were colonized by Rome, then we were colonized by the bank, and now we're a slave to a non-existing European Union policy. And the reason I say slaves to a non-existing European policy is this. I had the good fortune to meet Jimmy Deanahan when he was Minister for Arts, when Michael D was in London, and he had a little meeting about this. And I explained this in some details. The first thing he said was, it must be European Union policy. Now, this is a kind of default position. I told him he was completely wrong. In actual fact, the policy in the European Union in most countries is the exact opposite. Now, listen to this. In the European Union, national procurement outsources from their countries, like Germany outsourcing to, say, Sweden, is 2%. In our case, from our state, it's 28%. That's a massive drain out of the economy. That is huge. That's billions. So what have we got? Government policy is shooting own goals, and it must stop now. And just to give you an idea of, when I'm saying culture, books are culture in Europe. Books fall into cultural policy. Here is the Minister for Culture in France. Culture is a formidable factor of growth, generating direct economic benefits that are infinitely superior to any investment mobilized. Culture must be viewed as an important tool for economic development. Culture is also a powerful factor in economic success. In Ireland, we don't look on culture in that way at all. We look on culture as something where you give handouts, very small handouts. We do not appreciate what we have. In the European Union of 27 countries, almost all of them have integrated cultural policy. Fixed price for books by law, local library procurement sometimes within cities. In other words, a city like Cork, the local procurement to the library is from a Cork supplier. Books, tourism, information technology, arts, libraries, theatre, film, music are all stitched into one integrated cultural policy, creating millions of jobs and millions of euros. Learn from them. We must learn from them. The first cultural minister in Europe was appointed in the 1880s in France. So they're light years ahead of us, but they know how to do it. And I would say, abandon brutal American, British, down to the bottom, winner-takes-all economic policies, is which we are mirroring. Because in Europe, they play smart and they protect their economies and they're very effective. Make culture an economic force. The Department of Art's annual budget is less than one day's expenditure in the Department of Education. It's probably about 1 hour of the Department of Health. Arts Council should get 100 million because the amount of jobs that spins off would be way out of proportion. In other words, more jobs per year for money. Culture Ireland should get 20 million. At the moment it gets 3. Another thing that really affects me as a publisher, because I publish writers, is our government deciding to name 2 warships after Joyce and Beckett. These are people who were drummed out of this country, who couldn't live here. And lots of writers were banned, you know. The hypocrisy of that compared to cultural policy is just mind-blowing. I would say scrap the national procurement policy for libraries before it scraps us. I feel a sense of shame for my country. And, you know, I am a patriot. I really do feel a sense of shame. Where are the strategic long-term policies from any government, including this government? We help generate wealth. We help generate wealth. It's politicians spend it. I think it's very important to remember that. There are very few business people actually in the Dáil or the Senate. Fergal Quinn is an outstanding example, but a very small minority.
I remind you that we're here to discuss access to public procurement contracts for small suppliers. So if we could remain within the remit of the committee.
Just one last point. As we celebrate our 100th anniversary of 1916, I wouldn't like to think that the procurement policy that's proposed would be implemented, because many of the 1916 leaders were writers and intellectuals, and they did not die for this kind of stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. And now we'll invite Ms. Mary Fallon from Alan Hanna's Bookshop to make a contribution.
Well, my contribution is going to be very short because Michael hasn't discussed an awful lot of the book end of the industry. I'm from Alan Hanna's Bookshop in Rathmines, and my children are the 4th generation of a long-established book-selling family in Dublin. In this time, we have provided lots of local jobs and contributed substantially to the local economy in the form of wages, rates, taxes, etc. Now, I live in fear of this small business closing only on account of public procurement. We have been library suppliers for nearly 40 years, and under tender since the year 2000. In 2012, the library end of Dublin went to tender, and they all grouped together, Dún Laoghaire, South Dublin and Fingal. In this tender was won 600,000 by a British company. Now that exports at least 6 jobs, because the Booksellers Association reckon that 100,000 in book spend is equal to 1.5 jobs. Am I allowed to mention the bookshops that closed on account of this? Green's Bookshop closed totally on account of this going to Britain, this particular procurement, losing 6 jobs. Collins Bookshop in Cork lost 4 jobs and it closed completely. I myself lost 1.5 jobs due to this procurement policy. Now, the 1.5 job I even still have, that girl lives in South County Dublin. She is getting €100 a week subsidised wages. If I had got a bit of that contract, she would be working a 5-day week. So where is the saving to our government? Can anybody answer me questions like that? I speak to politicians about it. They all say, not my place. Go to public procurement. Right to public procurement, they tell you it's the EU legislation, which it is not. In EU legislation, cultural and social policies may be taken account of. Recently, Dublin City went again to tender. I've been supplying books to Dublin City. They're Irish published books since I was a teenager. I lost this contract. Nobody has the experience I have doing this. I source them. You might think that we get a box of books, that Dublin City would send you in an order and we send them out books. This is not how it happens. I source the books. I trawl the newspapers, periodicals, the television, the internet for small publications, from the poet that walks in off the street to everything else. This tender was 65% marks on price alone, 35% on service. Service is huge. It's a huge job to supply these books. These books, we source them, we take them to the library makes a choice from the books that we bring them. Not the other way around. They don't make the choice of books and order them. We do this. We cover the books, we laminate them, we security tag them, we stamp them, we label them. This is all part of the service that is provided. Next year I will lose at least another job. And I don't think anybody cares. I have a girl working with me for 35 years. What do I say to her? Government don't care. Now, we could go the Scottish route, where they are taking into account local people. The Scottish bill is that the authority has a duty to act with a view to securing improvement to the economic and social and environmental well-being of the authority's area. We could go that route. We could go the French route. They purchase their books within 60 kilometres radius. 30, is it? 30. Why do we have to go to a national consortium? It knocks every one of us out of the supply of this. I'm really passionate about this because I am going to lose this business.
Sorry, can I?
Did Ms. Fallon? You've concluded? Yeah, you have? Yeah, okay. Mr. McAfee?
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. If I can just cite something which, a memo which has recently been created and ratified by the Committee of the Booksellers Association of the United Kingdom and Ireland, and they submitted to the UK government review, and part of the statement reads that there needs to be a genuine competitive tendering and the avoidance of monopolies. We therefore do not support single central buying authority acting on behalf of all libraries. A range of options and alternative sources of supply should be available to local authorities in order to create healthy competition for the contracts to supply. This will include creation and maintenance of jobs on a local basis throughout. Our industry is built on knowledge. And most bookshops, like libraries, are curators of our culture and our locality. I know that, I trade in Portlaoise, which is your own constituency, and we actually produce local books which would not be produced by big companies like O'Brien Press. But these are very important, and it's very important to have a stage to be able to present those to our local communities. We are as important, bookshops are as important in their local communities as libraries are. And we work hand in hand with the librarians to ensure that the community has access and that we are creating jobs all of the time. I'm astounded that our colleagues at the other end in the copier and print supply had to spend 206,000 proving that Irish jobs are important to be maintained. And it is an insult to citizens of this state that we have to take this legal route. It's really hurtful. And I think we have to bear in mind as well that in the tendering process, companies, me as a company director, have a responsibility to trade responsibly and not recklessly. And if we go to the bottom dollar to win these contracts, it's going to make our trading capability unsustainable into the future. And we have to bear that in mind as well. And local authorities do depend on businesses like me to fund them. So, you know, we could be cutting off our nose to spite our face.
Thank you,
And
Mr.
again, I feel passionately about this as well.
Thank you.
Could I
Yes.
just, sorry, could I respond to John's comment there about the reason that we had to proceed with illegal action is we felt there are...
Discuss this.
No, it's not, we're not discussing the illegal action. It's felt that we had no other route. There's no such thing as an ombudsman, no such thing as an appeals process. If you find something wrong, it's basically, that's the way the tender is set out, and that's the way it is. So we had no other option. If you look at the food industry, I don't know that people actually know that there is no Irish food supplier supplying the Defence Forces, the HSE, the prison services. They're all supplied from outside the state now. Even in your own constituency, the cash and carry in Tullamore, 150 years old, closed because it wasn't able to tender for any business. 30 jobs gone. Now, we looked at all these things and we said, we can't leave this happen to our business. So that's why we took this very expensive route. We didn't want to do that. We brought up the matter with the OGP about the way that the VAT is dealt with. They said it's none of their concern. What people don't understand is that a lot of the VAT is being returned to Her Majesty's Exchequer. Because under the VAT rules, the invoice, if the turnover is less than €41,000 per annum, the VAT must be returned to the jurisdiction where the invoice was raised. So they may make a 10% saving on purchasing that item from a UK supplier or somewhere else, but there's a 23% loss to the state, as well as the jobs that were lost to the state. The pork products in our hospitals are coming from Spain. Our pig farmers are on their knees, and we're buying from Spain. It makes absolutely no point, and it makes no sense. They're aggregating contracts together, and they're saying, the OGP are saying, we're helping SMEs, we're breaking them into lots. I'll give you a classic example of how a lot, where they broke contract into lots. You have stationery suppliers. A stationery supplier supplies stationery, toners and inks, and copier paper. The OGP decided, no, what we'll do is break it into 3 separate lots. One lot is paper for the entire country, one lot is toners and ink for the entire country, and one lot is stationery items for the whole country. One of their stated aims was to reduce the administrative burden on the state. They've tripled it. Instead of having one supplier supplying you with your copier paper, your copier toner, and your stationery, you now have 3. But each lot was so big, because it was for the entire state, that they all breached the €125,000 limit, which pushed them into the EU journal, which then we invited in outside the state companies to tender for them. None of these people that are purchasing this stuff have one budget. It's not one common budget. Cork County Council still purchases out of their budget. Laois County Council still purchases out of their budget. But they're aggregated together as if they were one. And that's how they're saying, oh, we break it into lots so that SMEs can compete. It's untrue. It's just pacifying us. It's a way that they can come in here in a minute and say, well, we break it into lots. But the way they break it into lots is ridiculous.
Okay. I wanted to move to questions and answers, but I see you signalling. Do you want to leave it until it's part of a response to something else, or do you want to go ahead?
Just very quickly, I think there's a disconnect between procurement and the results of procurement. I'm a book supplier. I started selling books in one of Fergal's shops at one stage. In the UK, we don't need to think about what's going to happen in library supply with tendering. It's already happened in the UK. As Michael mentioned, all the small suppliers are all gone. They're all completely gone. Now, the result of that was that over the same period of time, and I can't make an absolute connect between this, but the usage, the issues from libraries in the UK decreased by 75% over that 10-year period. Libraries in the UK are in crisis and are closing. The Irish libraries are vibrant. Their issues are increasing year by year, and they're vibrant. They're getting great service from local suppliers. I'm a full-time library supplier. I employ people just to do library supply. They get a great service from us. The libraries, by definition, are services. They deliver a service to the community. They're service-orientated organisations. Just to purchase books on price alone, and we have had tenders here where the criteria was 100% on price, with no percentage, even 1% per service. This is anathema to libraries. And we've seen what happened in the UK. We know what's going to happen here. We're all going to go out of business, and eventually libraries will go out of business too, if we follow the UK course. We're too small a country, our companies are too small, and it's perverse to bring in a government policy that discriminates against local suppliers. That's not just me saying that. Chambers Ireland said that in a press release on the Dún Laoghaire tender for book supply in this year. They said Dún Laoghaire down in issuing that tender was discriminating against local suppliers, and that's perverse, and that shouldn't be allowed to happen. And I would call on the members here to do something about it, to make sure something happens, that we get a result out of this meeting, and that we're not just creating a report here that goes on the shelf and nothing happens. And I would really call on the members to do something about it.
Who signalled first? Deputy Trubin.
Gurmil Magad Kahirlig agus Gurmil Magad Hain as a quid Curloher. I was self-employed myself before I became a TD, so I know the experience of self-employment. Tomorrow's dinner is based on the fact that you actually earn a living today. It's a hand-to-mouth experience in general. I find it really frustrating that the government has imposed laws which are effectively anti-business and anti-jobs. There's €9 billion roughly in government spend on goods and services. 22% of that is roughly €2 billion. That's a massive potential stimulus into the economy. And on the figures that Ms. Fallon introduced there would be about 20,000 jobs. And given that we've had 40,000 jobs added since this government came into power, 20,000 jobs is a big figure. I met the Minister in early 2012 on this issue and put the point with regards economic benefit needs to be found within procurement, but economic benefit also meant that people didn't lose their jobs and that companies weren't pushed out of business, so taxes couldn't be paid, etc. So the cheapest contract is not necessarily the most economically advantageous to a state, and what I got from that was a shrug as such. The issue can be resolved. In the north, we had a minister, Conor Murphy, who was involved in the regional development department there, and he was involved in the breaking up of contracts. So that, in other words, large roads contracts could actually be broken up into small parcels and accessed by smaller businesses without actually changing the cost benefit at all to the state. I also feel there's a number of other issues within the contracting mechanism here. If we push for the lowest cost, it often means that some contractors actually buy tenders. And what they do is then they squeeze out a subcontractor down the line to actually regain any disadvantage that might have been in financial disadvantage for them in the contract itself. And we see that right across the actual construction industry. And one other point I want to make as well, I've also seen where the IDA have given funds to FDI to come to the state, and that FDI then orientate their business into the domestic market on tenders and then outprice local businesses and push them out of jobs as well. That happened actually to a company in Meath. Really, I suppose what I'm trying to find out is sometimes if you quantify the experience of an industry, it's easier to communicate that message both to the general public and to the government. Do you have any idea of exactly how many businesses have gone out of business over the last number of years in relation to this, or any amount of jobs that have been lost in relation to this as well?
6 jobs from Greens, 4 from Collins Bookshop, 9 from O'Mahony's in Limerick, 1.5 from me.
Yeah, and at least 6 from me. And another company on the island, but in Belfast, closed as well. Roundup closed as well. They were a huge company. Another loss of jobs. And that was all as the result of one tender, 2012. And what that resulted in was, like Michael O'Brien having to export his books to Norwich, to come back into Dún Laoghaire, to go into the local libraries. It's perverse.
What has happened with the last tender that went out, the last Dún Laoghaire tender, is that we were all so scared of the British coming back in and doing it again, that we all went in with unsustainable discounts. And I went in with an unsustainable discount and didn't get it. I didn't go far enough.
Deputy Kine. Oh, apologies. Go ahead, Mr. Hackman.
Just not in our industry, but certainly in the constituency, Laois Offaly, 30 butchers' jobs were shed in Féile Foods there. And they lost...
Can we stick within the remit here of our
well, 30 jobs,
consideration?
30
Yeah,
jobs are
obviously,
lost.
but we want to stick within the remit. That's why we're here today. Because we need to get a really great report out of this, because we want to do you justice. So if we can focus on why you're here and the report that we can make, then will be better if we can do that.
The jobs were lost, though,
Absolutely. Yes, certainly. And
as a result of...
yeah, I appreciate that. What I'm trying to get at is that there's a reason why we're here today. There's a reason why there are book people that are here today.
Sure.
We want to focus on this, so it will make our report better if we can
Sorry.
focus on that.
I apologise.
No problem at all. Mr.
To
O'Brien.
your specific query. I can only talk in terms of our own individual group and in relation to our own industry. Any calculations we made, our group would be representative of about 150 employees in total. Now, within that, some of our